Okay, I say we reclaim some good energy. I need some like clapping, some cheering for Pridefest, storytellers. Okay, thank you. That's very helpful. Welcome to the 22nd Tales of the Taphouse event. Wow. My name is Rose. I am the event coordinator. I have a confession to make. The annual partnership between Tales of the Taphouse and Pridefest is one of our absolute favorite events of the year. So let's hear it for Pridefest one more time. Laramie Pridefest mission is to celebrate, honor, and support Wyoming's LGBTQ+ community, all while centering on the legacy where Pride began, the Stonewall riots in 1969. So we'll remember that today as we hear from our storytellers. Okay, tonight's theme is generations, in case you didn't know. Audience members, you also can share a story with us as we conclude the event this evening. So we will do a drawing. Anita's holding a bowl right now with some paper and pens, and that is sitting on a table there tucked in the corner. So if you've kind of been thinking about sharing a story with us anyway, or you feel newly inspired as you hear stories tonight, then please put your name in the bowl. I do ask that queer identifying folk only participate in the drawing, so we can continue to reserve this space and show extra value and respect for our queer community. Okay? And my final announcement is there will be a lot of trigger warnings given before the storytellers share. So know that this is a space where you can freely come and go. You will not be disrupting the event. And then we are also so grateful to Dr. Kilwine. Many of you know her as Tess. Tess, if you could wave or stand. Tess did the announcement earlier. Tess is offering to hold space and conversations for those of you who feel like seeking them out after the event. Okay, that was it. So I'm going to introduce our first storyteller, Raven, and Raven's +1, which I don't know their name, so Azealia, cool name. I'm going to stand up here while I introduce you. Raven has lived in Laramie for over 35 years, with family roots going back to the lane of the railroad. Raven strives to make their community a positive place for everyone, from creating and maintaining a safe space for people to perform and express themselves through Laramie Burlesque, to being a voice for those unable to speak up for themselves. Raven strives to make Laramie and Albany County a place for LGBTQ+ identifiers to thrive.
Most of the time I don't need a mic. Yeah, this is my second time. My story is a little bit different. It kind of involves my bonus daughter that I got to have starting about this time last year. But it kind of goes back a little bit further. As Rose had mentioned, my family goes back here in Laramie to the laying of the railroad. On First Street Plaza used to be my family's blacksmith. So generations have always been here, and I feel like this is where my roots are and where I want this community, the best community. And literally, I call Laramie the place where you can have all kinds of different people mingle and feel safer than anywhere. My first coming out story is kind of how I want to do my generational. I first came out to my grandfather. Came out as bisexual, because all the identifiers that are now here didn't exist, 25 years. It was something that was really hard. He was a Marine for 35 years. I felt intimidated by that, considering the fact that he ruled with an iron fist. He was actually one of the most supportive people coming out. Said, well, whoever has a problem with my daughter, and he was the one that raised me, that they have a problem with me. And if they have a problem with me, they have a problem with my Marine Corps. If anybody knows anything about the Marines, that is a brotherhood that is not broken, pretty intense. So he encouraged me to come out to my mother at the time. My father was a little bit more absent, mom was at the time. Came out to my mom, and I kind of learned that her love was very different from a lot of other people who come out to their mother, and that's where the support is. Later on, I'm about 18, and I hadn't spoken with my time, and I wanted to figure out who he was. Strangely enough, he was a Presbyterian. I came out to him just as I did the rest of my family. He quit the church. I can't be a part of something that hurts my family, makes me judge. So that was kind of intense for me to have this wave of emotion, someone that wasn't around very long actually come into my life and be very supportive, and has literally stood by my side ever since I found them again. And then it's just been, I've been a part of a lot of my friends coming out stories where I'm their support system for their, so they can protect them a lot of the time. A little bit of backstory about me. I used to be a professional fighter for 6 years, so a lot of people have a tendency to feel safer around me because I can lay down the smackdown. But one of my kind of biggest moments was when my friend, and also a former burlesque performer, came out to his parents. He decided to do it on Easter. Not the best timing, but I don't think there's a timing thing for anything like that. He had asked me, he was all like, hey, I know inviting a Viking to Easter is not necessarily the most appropriate thing to do, but I would like you to come with me to Easter. Didn't know why. I was like, oh, hey, cool, gets me out of Laramie, can go up into the mountain, whatever, sounds great. And, he was like, just don't burn the church down. And I was like, well, I don't plan on going to church, so I think we're safe. And then it's Easter morning. I find, they're wrestling around getting the coffee started for everybody. And my friend decides to come out to his mom first. I'm laying on the couch since that's where I fell asleep. And I hear the words, I guess I will love you. That triggered me into what I had to deal with my mother, where you learn love is conditional at some point in time from your parents, and I don't think children should really experience that, no matter what their parents' beliefs are. And I told him, I was like, you need to take me back to Laramie, because this is not, this is your parents' house, I'm gonna try and be respectful. And it then turned into them being like, oh, well, you're straight, you know that. And I'm like, actually, no, I'm not. And I think that's why your son chose for me to be here, so I can be by his side, make him feel safe while he's coming out to you guys. But apparently, you guess you will love him. So I am taking him now back to Laramie, because I guess that's what he deserves. Shortly after that, I actually became more involved with Laramie Burlesque. I became the head of Laramie Burlesque, and I chose that it was not just going to be a burlesque performance area. I wanted to incorporate more things like drag and more things like vaudevillian kind of sideshow stuff. And at the end of the day, I just wanted people to be able to express themselves, how they felt in their true selves. There's very many of our performers that are one way out in public, and when they're up on stage, they're more their true selves, and I love that I can provide that for people. I also became the volunteer coordinator for Drag Queen Bingo with the Stilettos. I'm not sure how many of you have go to that event, but it's a blast. It's a lot of fun where we raise money for Wyoming AIDS Assistance, and it's a charity that is very, very, very close to my heart, considering the fact that there's actually only one hospital in Wyoming that deals with helping people with their AIDS treatment or even treating those people with AIDS. Last year, we were actually able to help pay a 12-year-old's doctor bills through what we had raised. And in 20 years, one thing that's pretty cool, we've actually raised $1 million for people in Wyoming. And it's everything from paying a dentist bill because gas is expensive, or paying for gas so that they can actually be transported around, to even paying rent because they're afraid, that they might lose their house because they can't afford it because they have to pay a doctor's bill. So that charity is very, very close to my heart. Shortly after that, I had a bunch of friends that I played D&D with. All of them kind of identify more as non-binary, and I've always kind of flowed between, being pansexual myself. I'm attracted to humans, not parts. And I kind of very much became more okay with the fact that I really didn't identify as female. It was something that was very hard for me to come up with, considering the fact I'm a big-chested individual. They're kind of hard to hide when I have more male-oriented day, I think is the only way I can really phrase that. But through the help of my friends, I was able to come out and be able to do that. I, once again, kind of talked to my family about that at the beginning of the year. My mother, once again, kind of swooped in and did her motherly thing and actually took my car away from me. I was making car payments and had this little girl at the time, so it was really hard because we live out in the county. It's not the easiest thing to find friends to come out and get us, or, it's a 10-minute drive into town. And then my siblings no longer talk to me. My mother no longer talks to me. And that made me struggle with my mental health for probably the first time in my life. It was a real struggle. I don't think you gave my trigger warnings. Trigger warnings. Mental health, what else? Depression and suicide, just so you all know. Mentioned the mental health part. I became extremely depressed. This little one basically saved me because I had something to live for. But then I struggled with my first thoughts of suicide. Something that runs in my family, unfortunately. And I thought that I could beat the system and cheat the system and not have to deal with that. But it's really hard when you lose family. And after that, I decided to go through treatment and get better so that way I can still be a supportive column in our community, but mostly be here for my little Stitch. Oh, your spirit animal from Lilo and Stitch. So, but the other part was just about May, I think it was. My daughter decided to come out to me. She saw that I was a safe place, saw that, she didn't choose either one of her parents, which was kind of weird for me, but breath in your hair. It was kind of reassuring that the work that I'm doing shows. She sees me get my costumes ready for shows. She sees the stress that shows take and events take, and she's always there to cheer me up. But I just want to thank you for being there and, knowing that we're here for future generations, right? Yeah. Okay. You get the mic.
Okay. So, I'm proud of myself about coming out and being myself in front of other people, and not just people that I know, people that I actually don't know. and how Raven encouraged me to be who I am and not to hide anything from anybody, and how I can be there for other kids, supporting them coming out as well, like to their parents.
Thank you both so much. Okay, we're going to move on to our second storyteller. If you follow our social media, this won't come as a surprise to you that Daniel is going to also be a featured storyteller. So if you want to come next to me while I introduce you. Okay, so Daniel works across a range of nonprofits in Wyoming. He currently serves as chair of Laramie Pridefest, which has spearheaded a statewide coalition of queer organizations called And Let Live. This coalition was initiated with the close collaboration of Casper Pride and Wyoming Equality. And Daniel has enjoyed learning about all the extraordinary work that queer communities across Wyoming are doing. A Laramie native, Daniel spent most of his 20s in Birmingham, England. While in the UK, he completed graduate school and worked as a lecturer, music teacher, and freelance connector. In his spare time, Daniel enjoys gardening and making music, and he is a proud member of the Relative Theatrics Board. Let's hear it for Daniel.
All right, I'm one of the weirdos who really likes public speaking, and this is very, very new to me. And I was inclined initially to try to apologize for this piece, and I'm just gonna do it instead and see what happens, see how it stands. I am hiding behind a script, though. In the King James translation of the Bible, we see an Old Testament God caught up in one of his typical declarations of vengeful grumpiness, getting some of his plans off his chest during a chat with Moses. He describes these plans as follows: keeping mercy for thousands, forgiving iniquity and transgression and sin, and that will by no means clear the guilty, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and upon the children's children unto the third and to the fourth generation. So somehow thousands have their transgression and sin washed away, but not everybody. Some guilt digs in and gets passed down from generation to generation, which leaves me to ask, why some sins and not others? The God we've just heard from isn't one I happen to believe in, but when I think of my experience of the generations of gay men, the passing of knowledge to each new man who we welcome into the fold, whether older or younger than us, I think of how this original sin of loving whom we weren't supposed to manages to wreak havoc unto the third, fourth, fifth generation. Entire nations can be forgiven for their atrocities in time, but somehow I and so many of the other queer men in my life can't be. The pain and the trauma somehow seem to linger. I have a suggestion as to why this happens, why we still seem to pay for what was never a sin to begin with, to extend that statute of limitations, that fourth generation cutoff forever and ever and ever, amen. We, and by we, I mean primarily those who identify as gay or queer men. There's a lot of intersectionality here. We have passed on an inheritance of cruelty and hurt, not because any God in his right mind would ever think being gay was a sin. No, it's because of the all too human concept of shame. The stories of cis, white, gay men like me get told all the time. By now, the fucked up layers of masculinity among my compatriots are just cliches. And here I am, taking precious time and space to rehash these little sob stories. Maybe I'm no better than Moses' irritable friend God, and I just need to get a little rant off my chest. But I don't think it is just a rant, or at least I really hope not. These stories are a lot of queer men's stories of how our gay fathers and forebears instilled in us shame, and how we build up barriers against each other and the world, brick by brick, to guard our shame covetously and teach this defensiveness to others. They're the stories of the sins of our fathers that we visit upon ourselves in a doom loop of shame, because we still know deep down that we're somehow not the right kind of men or the right kind of queer. My first efforts to be a good gay came as soon as I started coming out widely. I was determined to build up strong barriers against the hurt that comes with being queer and to guard myself against the other, lesser queer people. So I took huge pride in being the gateway gay for friends and acquaintances. They'd find out I was gay and their response would go something like this. Well, I thought I didn't like gay people because of, how they acted, but you act all normal, so I guess gay people must be okay. And how unbelievably proud I was to show them that gay men could be tolerable, come out as being normal boys. So there's our first cliche. 2 for the price of 1, actually. I could go from passing out of necessity to passing as a matter of pride. And I could come out with inbuilt defenses, embracing masculinity by throwing my fellow gay men right under the bus. And I kept that up. After all, being gay meant liking men. Why would I want to date someone who wasn't a proper man? I held on to this even after shame was passed on to me by my first boyfriend, a sophomore to my fresh-faced freshman at UW. The relationship was short and cruel. As the elder gay, he made quick work of determining what I liked in bed, then informed me of this fact, and that was my usefulness to him. Until he finally tired of me, he did his best to make sure I knew exactly who was in control of the relationship because, of course, he was the one equipped to speak with generational wisdom. Of course, none of this is new. Anyone who's ever glanced for more than a moment at the app Grindr knows how important it is for gay men to exercise as much control as possible without ever exposing too much. Okay, yes, we expose quite a lot sometimes, but it's meticulously curated. And woe betide the poor young gay who falls afoul of the ubiquitous no femmes, no gays, no femmes, no big guys, no cut, no uncut, no whatever. I'm not judgmental of the profile ads, it's just my preference. I think of a time I was tapped by a particularly attractive gay man on Grindr. For those of you not familiar with Grindr, it's like when you used to get poked on Facebook. I don't think that happens anymore. So I messaged him, hey. He replied, no. You tapped me? No, I didn't. I never waste my time on someone like you. It's such a dumb routine, yeah, again, cliched Grindr interaction, but it stuck with me, and not because my feelings of hurt. Of course they were, at least briefly, but it was more awe than hurt, at the lengths this person would go to protect the kind of person a person like him would be around. We feel like we have to control our worlds. We're absolutely desperate to make sure they work in exactly the way we want them to, and what better way to do that than blockade ourselves safely in a fortress of unkindness. And anyone less experienced gets taught very quickly how the system works. We elder gays teach them what is expected of them in sex. We charitably educate them in every single one of their personal and physical flaws. We make sure they know that their feelings, their very humanity isn't that important. At best, they're probably an afterthought. And my generation visits this shame on the next one because it's how we were taught. Can you blame us? My immediate forebears were gay men who truly believed that the way to show friendship and camaraderie is through witty barbs and degrading insults, who guarded themselves by being as vicious as possible. Of course, I know now that I'm aging out of influence. Those younger than me are driving us to be smarter, better aware, and more committed to our mental health. But these lessons are learned unevenly at best. In learning self-care, we seem also to arm ourselves for self-defense. For example, here's another cliche for you. A man I dated used the armaments of self-care to ensure that my growing feelings for him didn't outpace what was acceptable to him, who used the well-rehearsed neutralizing power of mental health language to remind me just how silly it was to want him to elevate me from the status of an afterthought, even while he assured me that nothing of the sort was occurring. The men I'm talking about are overwhelmingly kind and good. I think most of us are, or at least want to be. But cruelty among gay men, or defensiveness, or selfishness, or even just a desire to somehow win our conversations and interactions with each other creeps in among even the kindest of queer men. It mars too much of our time with each other and with the queer community. And I'd like to be done with it. I don't know if I can manage to swap out exclusive self-care for a mix of self-care and genuine other care. that I can say fuck the barriers while still trying to conquer a nearly constant, sometimes crippling sense of fear and dread. I don't know if I can reject the cruelty of others without policing them, without shaming them. But I think I know where to start. Just last week, at one of Laramie Pridefest's sign-making events for our upcoming Pride March this Saturday, we welcomed a group of queer high school juniors and seniors. They were here as part of the Upward Bound program, so these were kids who were fighting through cyclical generations of poverty, variable levels of support at home, rural peer groups that, as we've seen recently in our own state, are all too ready to resort to violence and bullying in their own panicked, fearful cruelty. But every single one of these kids smiled at me. Every single one, unabashedly, but humbly. It's bad omen. They all shared with me the art they were working on for these signs. Each one of them listened to me and let me listen to them. They, and so many like them, have shown that you can express yourself and be yourself even better if you step out from behind the walls you may have built. In short, they showed real kindness. I hope this experience was something more than a one-off fluke. I hope that it really does mean that there's a generation with a real interest in kindness. I hope that my sins don't have to be visited upon their generation, but that their redemption can heal mine and those that came before me. There's a saying that one of my very best friends like to use, and I like it quite a lot too, even though it means I have to finish with one more cliche. The kids are all right, and I really hope I can be too.
Thank you. Daniel told me his story was grouchy. Do you think it was grouchy? I think it was beautiful. Thank you, Daniel. Okay, we're going to have our third storyteller, Jules. After graduating in 2008, Jules left Connecticut to pursue an MFA in fiction at the University of Wyoming. They fell in love with Laramie's people, natural beauty, and proximity to empty spaces, and never left. Since finishing the MFA program, they have worked mainly as a cook and baker and have devoted time to discovering and constructing their concept of self as an individual and within a community. Understanding and expressing their identity in a coherent way has always been a struggle for Jules, and they aim for a continuous reimagining and regeneration of that identity throughout their life. They always have stories steeping in their brain, and one of these days we'll finish the novel about apocalyptic pandemic they began in 2009, maybe. Trigger warnings for this story are for death and suicide.
Hi, I'm Jules. Thank you to Rose and Anita for organizing and encouraging me to do this, and also to Bella, I don't know if they're here, but thanks. And also to my friends for panic relief, because I've been panicking a lot. My grandmother Dorothy loved playing the organ. Am I too close? My grandmother Dorothy loved playing the organ, driving too fast, and having friends all over town. She was a Spitfire 410 and raspy voiced like Katharine Hepburn, who had been smoking for many years. I never came out to her as queer, although I was out when she died. In 2005, when she was on her deathbed, she asked me if I had a spiritual life. I said no, and she said, "You're missing out." That was one of the only vaguely abstract or vulnerable things I ever heard from her, or ever heard her say to anyone. She was deeply practical. When I was a very small child, we had a family game called Wares. We would be standing around arguing some political point. Well, the adults would be standing around arguing some political point, and the kids, someone would disappear, and everyone would say, "Where's Alan? Where's Curtis?" One day, my brother, Alan, disappeared, and I was very concerned at 3 that he was gone. It took us all 20 minutes to realize in the one-room house that he had stashed himself in the rafters, and he was just stuck against the ceiling, and he was so still that none of us saw him. He had just shifted our perspective of him, and suddenly he was gone. I kind of sometimes feel like I did that to my family and friends on the East Coast, because I just left and for grad school for 2 years and never came back. But I, instead of reappearing, I kind of became a new person. I think possibly the post today from was me coming out to my cousins on Instagram that I hadn't talked to in a long time, and I love that. It's a continuing process always. After Granny died, a family member told me that she'd had romantic relationships with women in college. I'd known she had taken a scandalous trip to Europe with a boyfriend in 1939, which would have been enough of a scandal if she'd told her parents about it, so she just didn't. I asked my dad how much he'd have hated it that I had talked about this in public. And he said, well, as long as you don't claim anything crazy like she killed someone, I think it'll be fine. And also she's been dead for 18 years, so she's probably not gonna be too mad. But you've heard it here first, my grandmother did not kill anyone. She probably also would not have identified as queer, but knowing her history of doing what she wanted in spite of what people thought has made me feel the closest to her even after her death. And just because I never told her that I was queer doesn't mean she didn't know. Sometimes I feel frozen by her idea of me. As the very cooperative, people-pleasing, straight girl granddaughter, which is just not most of what I am anymore. And I wonder if coming out to her would have opened up previously unexplored vulnerability in both of us, or if she'd have said, why are you telling me this? Which is possible. When my brother died by suicide almost exactly a year ago, I hadn't come out to him either. He once asked me in response to a general political argument we were skirting, why you care about gay people, you're not gay. And to which I said something generic about everyone deserving human rights instead of coming out to him, which had been my intention. I felt stuck there too, because maybe if I had told him then, he would have changed his opinion on the queer community. I don't know. And there are always unanswerable questions with suicide, but I know that he did love me in spite of our opposing views, so I always wonder if I could have changed that, if I had just taken that step, but I didn't. But what I've realized is that their views actually don't matter because they're not who creates my identity, that is me. And this maybe should have been obvious, but as a long-term yes man, it did not become that way until I moved thousands of miles from anyone who I'd ever known. When I moved here, I'd never been west of Atlanta, and I thought New York City was the center of the universe. And the longer I've lived here, the more myself I've become. The thing that began my breakaway from doing only what I was supposed to do was coming out as bi freshman year of college. It was the first thing I did that went against what my parents would have ideally chosen for me. And don't worry, they have also changed. They're very supportive now. But breaking off allowed me room to create my own space and develop my tastes and ideas. And I've done that over the last 14 years of being here. This January, I decided I was going to stop letting my anxiety ruin things. Now I've lost my spot. There we go. And then I proceeded to let my anxiety ruin a bunch of things. But I'm learning. I made a list of the things for this event, which has actually been really helpful just in my general life, of things that I have done to make me feel more like myself, and to generate an identity I actually enjoy and like, rather than letting my identity be frozen in the minds of people who aren't here and who aren't me. This is just a few of them. I filled my house with art by loved ones. I listen to music about 96% of the time that I'm by myself. I've done endless research into my own brain and mental health. I have abandoned the idea of one career job and embraced the multiple gratifying side gigs that I have, which was also what my grandmothers both did. And I've surrounded myself with queer and marginalized voices in all areas of my media consumption. And I have also recently tried to connect with some kind of spiritual life because I want to explore whether or not my grandmother had a point. My friend Heather, when I was anxiety spiraling at her about something, once told me that people's impressions of you are not built on just one moment or interaction, but there are a series of moments and interactions over time. And for me, that's true of my identity as well. I've done and been a series of things, and I sometimes say that I've had a lot of different lives. And I can be all or none of them as the mood fits, whether or not other people see that. One of my first counselors gave me this card with a quote on it during our last session before she moved away. It's a Kafka quote, and I liked it so much that I got a tattoo about it. This one. I've also hung on to this card over 3 moves in 8 years, so it made a big impression, and I will leave you with this. Don't bend, don't water it down, don't try to make it logical, don't edit your own soul according to the fashion. Rather, follow your most intense obsessions mercilessly. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jules. And our first 2 storytellers, Daniel and Raven, thank you too. This is the moment for our intermission. So we are going to take a brief break, stretch your legs, grab another sandwich, and then we will hear from a Laramie Pridefest rep once we unite. Okay, thanks.